Over 170 years ago, Henry David Thoreau observed, "The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation." Is this you? Do you feel trapped in the rat race we call life? Are you truly the person you desire to be? Are you unhappy with where you find yourself physically, mentally, or spiritually? Let's make the life changes necessary to empower you with happiness and contentment, belief and confidence in yourself. Join the discussion with countless other people who want nothing more than to be the best version of themselves that they can be. Welcome to Better with Jimmy Blackman.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Better. I'm your host, Jimmy Blackman, and totally stoked about today's show. Got my buddy Dan Houlihan on today. And really, one of the big things about this show is Dan represents the population that I really had in mind when I thought about doing the podcast. And that is, former athlete, very dedicated, elite level, and then got into corporate America, had a family, hit the road, and before long wasn't working out and health deteriorating. And now he's decided to turn it around. But there's so many out there that haven't done that yet. And so that was really, the show was meant to speak to those people and hopefully inspire them to get back active, to keep moving, right, to get started. So Dan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks for having me.
You
Looking
bet.
forward to the chat.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about, well, let me background. Dan's an entrepreneur, started some businesses, CEO, sold some businesses, but he was single for a long time, which afforded him a lot of free time to devote to his hobbies, which were, of course, endurance sports, triathlon for Dan. Dan's a former 236 marathoner, Ironman Triathlete finisher. So really committed, devoted, and then later on got married a little bit later than a lot of folks. And then, of course, into corporate America, and that took a lot of time. What got you into endurance sports to begin with, Dan?
Yeah, it's a good question. So going way back, I was always an athlete, right? So I played Pee Wee football. I played Little League baseball. Then got into high school. I played football in high school. I was a running back and a linebacker. And then I was on the ski team. So I was a ski racer. I'd grown up skiing and played baseball in summer leagues all through high school. And then hit college, and that's when everything stopped from an athletic perspective. And then came out and got into corporate America, if you will, and just really did not take care of myself. Put a ton of weight on. I was actually, for your viewers, I'm not very tall. I'm 5'6", and I got up to 200 pounds, which is pretty round for someone who's 5'6". So,
When your
so this is literally how it.
When your waist exceeds your inseam.
Yeah, exactly. So it was time. And so you can't make this up. I literally decided, all right, that's it. And I had done a lot of running. Ski racing actually involves a lot of running, distance running. You got to be pretty fit. A lot of, people haven't ski raced, they wouldn't necessarily appreciate that. So I had a running background. And so I literally started the first day I ran from my apartment in Boston. I ran one telephone pole and back. And the next day I did 2 telephone poles and back. And fast forward, then all of a sudden I was an Ironman. So I'll come back to the details of that. But a couple of my buddies were trying to get me on Oprah because I had gone from roly-poly 200-pound kid to, finishing 20th in an Ironman. So anyway, so it started that way. I literally just said, okay, that's enough. Time to get myself in shape. So just started running, and then got into weights, joined a health club and started to get really fit. And I belonged to this particular health club in Boston, and I wasn't running races, but I was running on the treadmill every day fairly religiously. And then I'd lift weights. And one of the fitness trainers who had, since became a dear friend of mine, came over to me one day after I got off the treadmill and was like, "Hey, you should run with us. And so a couple of the guys that were trainers at this gym were serious athletes. They were sort of getting into the early days of triathlon. This is showing my age, but when I was doing triathlon, it was before it sort of became the rage and the cool thing. And so I started running with these guys on the weekends, and then we did a couple races, and I was faster than I thought, but not, it's kind of middle of the pack. And then these guys were professional fitness trainers, so they started to give me pointers on how to do interval work, because I was literally just getting on the treadmill, running as hard as I could for 6 miles, and then calling it a day without any science or heart rate monitor or any of that. So I started to put a little science into it, a little heart rate work, little interval work, some hill work. And before you know it, I started to move up the ranks in the races, if you will, just local races, not big money races.
Everyone should know that every fiber of your DNA is competitive.
Oh, well. Yeah. I mean, we'll talk about that. It's a blessing and a curse, but the inner fire, like you, burns hot. And it's all the personality flaws that drive my wife crazy that actually help me in my professional athletic career, which is probably a whole other podcast. But so anyway, so I got together with these guys, started racing, and this was all just running to start. And then all of a sudden I was started to finish in the top 5 of local races. And then I won one. When I say local races, these were 5Ks and 10Ks, I hadn't gotten into the endurance stuff yet. And then, on a lark, I said, all right, I'm going to run the Boston Marathon, but as you know, you have to qualify for that. And I had not run a qualifier. So a friend of mine had another friend who had gotten in, had qualified, but had an injury and couldn't race. So I was racing on his number. So I trained for the marathon, and my first Boston Marathon, I ran in 2:56, I think, which is pretty fast for, a weekend warrior. Without any professional training, just, doing long runs. And I actually loved it. I mean, it hurt because I hit the wall at Heartbreak Hill in Boston, and the last 7 miles were not particularly fun.
The death march.
But I love the experience, right? It's one of those things, like right when you finish, you're like, God, I'm never doing that again. But then, a month goes by and you're like, you know what, that was pretty awesome. I'm in. And what I started to really love was the distance running and the grind. And, just, as you just sort of zone out. And so that sort of became my thing. And what's fascinating is, I never, then it started to get really competitive. That's kind of after I ran the marathon and put up that time. That's when I was like, okay, I'm biomechanically suited for running. I'm a little guy. I don't have any pronation or anything. So biomechanically, I was fine. And I had been an athlete and, fairly tough, can suck it up. So I started to take it seriously. And then I actually won a local marathon, and it was there was nobody showing up. It was a local sort of Boston qualifier, because I had to officially qualify, because even though my time was qualifying, it wasn't me. It was running under someone else. So this was I can remember this moment. So this was a local marathon called the Bay State Marathon, and it was a flat course, 2 loops. And I was just trying to break 250 just to get a number for Boston. And so I was out doing my 6:45 pace, comfortable. And a buddy of mine was there. He wasn't running, but he was on his bike. And there were, I distinctly remember this. There were 3 miles to go. And I had no idea what place I was in. I was just running. And I could see this guy off in the distance that was ahead of me, but I had no idea if there was another pack way out in front. So my friend biked up next to me, and he's like, you're in second place. And I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, you're in second place overall. And that like, I remember what I said to him, and I just came out. Like, I was just like, this guy has no idea what's coming.
It lit a fire.
and I honestly, I went from running 6:45s to, I think I ran the last 2 miles were 5:30s. And I passed this guy with about a quarter of a mile to go. And there was nothing he could do. And so you could argue, I was sandbagging it and not running hard enough during the course of the race, but I was, it was my second marathon. I was just trying to get a time. but I remember that the feeling of that was like the first time and you've no doubt had this experience where you sort of come out of yourself, and it's like it was like I was watching myself. It was like I was driving a race car, and because I knew, and I was doing the math in my head, as you do, when you're that fit and you've got 5 or 6 different gears, I'm doing the math of, all right, am I going to catch this guy? Yeah, I got this. And it, I suffered, but there was no way I wasn't passing this guy.
Yeah.
And so, people always ask me, and I'll get to the triathlons in a second, but people always ask me like, oh, you must be a health nut. And I'm like, well, actually not. It's a nice side benefit. But I like to race. Like I like to pass people.
Yeah.
And I know that, maybe that's.
So do you think you like, and I ask this because I've heard this discussed so many times about Lance Armstrong and Michael Jordan and these guys that just super good at their sport. Not so much, they don't call it liking to win. They hate to lose.
Yeah, one, it's funny talking about those guys. I mean, they're on a different planet, right? So
but it's a mentality.
Yeah, no, totally. I don't hate to lose. I never hated to lose a race because I was pretty self-aware that, look, I'm a pretty fast guy, but there's always someone faster. I mean, these college, some of these elite college athletes show up, or the Kenyans turn up at a race, and, there's nothing. There's no suffering. I can't suffer enough to ever beat those guys. So I always sort of kept that in check. But if it was the guy in front of me that was 100 yards ahead, that would piss me off if I couldn't pass them.
Well, I don't want to, at the risk of derailing you, though, I'm sure people are going to say, well, I've had Liam Collins on here, who is a marathoner. I had Sage on here, who is a marathoner and an ultramarathoner. And now I've got you on here. And there's some more that aren't runners coming. However, there's got to be a correlation between this drive, suffering, discipline, and business. I mean, that mentality, that work ethic.
No doubt. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, at the core, and you know me well. I mean, I feel like I'm fairly young at heart, jovial kind of guy, fun, but inside, I can be serious as a heart attack, and there's an intensity and a passion in there, and my fire just burns hot, and I do everything hard. Like, this is the problem. I mean, moderation was never my thing. And I know that sounds cliche, but I mean, everything hard, love hard, run hard. There was just no. And it's like, look, if you're gonna do something, then do it, right? Well, like, what's the point? You're not gonna climb half a mountain. What's the point? Climb the mountain. And
that's exactly mine.
Set goals, right? Like, I just can't. I can't mail it in.
Yeah. My wife, anytime anybody tries to get me to do something new, she gets very concerned. I mean, if somebody came over and said, "Hey, Jimmy, what are you doing next Saturday? Why don't you come play a round of golf with us?" She would intervene, like, whoa, because if I'm going to play golf, I'm going to get pro lessons. I'm going to be at the driving range every day. I'm going to be the best golfer I can be. And it's a problem. It has made me very good at almost everything I've done. Not necessarily the best, but very good at everything I've done. But it's a obsessive compulsive thing as well.
Well, yeah, and that's, so let me get to the triathlon, because it's a blessing and a curse, right? As you and I both know. So the triathlon started because it was kind of, again, this is going back, 25 years, when triathlon was not the rage that it is today. And I was on a team of 5 guys, and we were sort of the anti-triathletes, if you will. Like, we'd turn up, we'd do the races, and these were Olympic distance races at the beginning, which, for people who don't know, triathlon is I think a 1.2 mile swim, a 40K bike, which is around 25 miles, and then a 10K. So it's a couple hour effort. And so we would show up at these races, we'd do that. And then we'd have a cooler in the back of the car filled with beers, and we'd open it up and start, hanging out and tailgating. And everybody else was eating their, power bars and drinking their protein shakes, and was kind of looking at us like, who the hell are these guys? So we kind of prided ourselves on that. That might sound a little obnoxious, but we were kind of like, and we were called Team G, and we just six of us, and then we started training together in earnest. And at the time, as you noted, I was single, and I had a job that allowed me, and actually was to be fair, the company was very supportive of what I was doing. And so, started in the Olympic distance series, started to do pretty well in those, finish in the top 10, and then set my sights on the Ironman. But that was a multi-year process because I wanted to do a couple half Ironmans first. So I did a half Ironman, had a decent experience there. And then I did, several years later, did the big one, right? And I didn't do Hawaii. I did an Ironman that was in Sunapee, New Hampshire, which was in the mountains, which is really interesting because I didn't know how many feet of climbing there were on the bike until after I met you, which is at least 25 years later, because there were no power meters. There was heart rate monitors, but I never wore a heart rate monitor when I raced. I trained with it, but I never raced with it because I just didn't want to know, because I was off the charts. And it didn't matter. It wasn't about heart rate during the race. It was about who's in front of you, and I'm racing, and I don't care what the heart rate is. But so anyway, so I did the math after, it was a 5-loop bike course, and it was, I don't know, close to 8,000 feet of climbing, which, it was not massive, but it's not insignificant.
Yeah.
And I actually didn't really do any hill training. And so, but that was such an accomplishment for me. I mean, look, a lot of people have done it, and it's doable. I don't think it's, I was in a good position where I didn't have a family. I had a team of guys that I was training with, so the camaraderie was awesome. But I will tell you, and I'll share this with you, like my parents were there. And I remember my dad saying to me before the race, like, don't worry, there's no shame if you don't finish. And I remember I wasn't mad, but I just kind of looked at him like I didn't say anything. I was just like, okay, thanks. But I'm like, I'm actually trying to win this thing. there's no scenario that I don't finish unless my bike breaks or I drown. And I sort of blew it off. And I ended up coming in 20th. I didn't have a very good bike. I kind of blew up on the bike. First 80 miles were strong, and then the last, 30 or 25 were pretty rough. And I can remember thinking to myself, with like 10 miles to go on the bike, like, God, get me off this thing.
I got to run a marathon now.
Yeah, I can't wait to get in my sneakers and run the marathon. And I remember this, people were passing me, and I would just, like, in a very low voice say, I'll see you in a couple of minutes. And so, I actually won the marathon in that Ironman. I didn't win the Ironman, but I had the fastest marathon time. So I passed probably 100 people on the marathon. And so, but one thing that happened was, I don't even know if I've ever told you this, but I crossed the finish line, and I don't know what happened. I just literally just walked away. My girlfriend at the time was there. My parents were there. I walked away. I went and I sat behind a big tree, and I just started crying, like literally just bawling and I couldn't figure out, like, what the hell, because I'm not a crier. I'm like, what the hell's going on? And I to this day, I don't know. I'm like, just emotion. It's such a long, hard day. Yeah. But I will tell you, like, doing the Ironman, and you'll appreciate this because given the things that you've done, is, if you're really in shape and you're ready to race, because Ironman is the race itself is the show, right? It's all the work and the process leading up to it that makes the day. The day is just a demonstration of your training.
Which a reward of all the work you did.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but I will tell you, like, your body can go, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, but your body can go more than you think it can. And so I would say that if you're really fit, and I was really fit, I'd say the Ironman itself was 75% mental.
Oh yeah.
Because it's a long day. It was 10 hours and something. And you have periods of time where you feel great, and then you have periods of time where you want to quit and you feel like crap. And then you refuel, and so you're constantly talking yourself off the ledge, like 10 hours of just self, like, not pleasant words that I wouldn't say. I wouldn't say them on this podcast, but you're talking yourself off the ledge.
Yeah, that inner voice that you were talking about earlier,
Yeah.
it's interesting because for me, I've never had the breakdown. I can't tell you how many people have the mental breakdown afterwards and just start crying. They're like, I don't even know what's going on. They're just your emotion. But I did have, um, I don't know, every marathon I ran, it seemed to be a different experience. But my best marathon at Richmond, I ran 2:36 that day, and I ran a perfectly even splits, like 12 seconds apart, first and second half. Second half, I was reeling people in, and it was really, I was motivated by, I'd see the next guy run to him. I wound up third, but the last 5 miles, like you mentioned earlier, it was almost like I was detached from my body. I was still in pain and whatever, but I remember like it was like mentally had this wave of overwhelming pain that I knew would stop me from running, and it was one step behind me. And it was almost like I was running from it. Like I had to stay one step in front of this pain that would be unsurmountable. If it caught me, I'm walking. And I ran from it all the way to the line. And I'll never forget, he's dead now. He died of cancer, but there was an all Army teammate there at the line. And I remember I crossed the finish line. I took about 2 steps. Mike Mann was his name. He said, "Great race, Jimmy." And I took another step, and it caught me. I remember feeling like physically this wave of pain just hit me, went into my body, and I couldn't even walk straight. I mean, I almost went to my knees, but it was like I had held it back mentally. I just thought mentally, keep one step in front of that, keep it behind you. And I was still running, subs, 5:49, 5:50 miles, and able to just stay in front of it. My body wanted to quit, but like you said, that mentally, you can talk yourself into, or convince yourself to endure more than you could ever imagine when you
Yeah.
get used to doing it.
You have these like even basic thoughts. Like I'd be thinking, all right, somewhere in the world is suffering more than me right now. Right. Like in the moment, like literally thinking that, like,
Yeah.
you can do this. And it's, as soon as you get to that finish line, it's over. The pain's going to go away. Just suck it up. And, other profanities and things,
Yeah.
but whatever techniques you need. But what I found is that, there's so many barriers that you push through on the journey of being an endurance athlete, where you do things that you never thought you could. And then, so the next time you experience that, you're like, I got this. And then you
So
push through
that's
another barrier.
So that's a huge thing that I talk about a lot. And that if you never suffer, when you suffer the first time, it will not be a pleasant experience. And so even people that train, but they do long, slow distance, LSD runs, as we used to call them, all the time, they never put themselves in extreme discomfort. And then when they really hit discomfort, they don't have the resiliency or the capability to suffer through to deal with it. It's no different in any other thing in life. I mean, at Ranger School for me, I was in combat in Afghanistan and Iraq, and it was pretty freaking miserable. And I remember saying all the time, it ain't winter, it ain't winter phase of Ranger School. I mean,
Yeah.
I had done something harder, and I'm like, if I can do that, I can do this.
Yeah.
Well, mile repeats by yourself at 5 o'clock in the morning in the winter when it's 20 degrees and drizzling rain are not pleasant, right? They're the last thing you want to do.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, I grew up, at the time, I live in Chicago now, but at the time, which is colder, but at the time I was living in Boston, and, this was year round stuff. So it was, to your point, it was, you get up at 6 a.m. and it's -5 degrees, and you just lace them up. You just get it done.
Right. And
You
and
know,
you
and
get
then you think to yourself, I mean, part of it is, all right, most people aren't doing this. I'm out there. And then just going back to that competitive thing, though, I had a couple of situations where, like, I had, so when I ran my fastest marathon, we did part of the health club I was telling you about had a marathon training program for people of all levels, and they did a really good job. So Saturday long run, they'd get out in cars and they'd set up water stops along the actual Boston Marathon route. So they'd drive us out to the start or drive us 20 miles back, and we'd go. And one of the guys on my team was one of the trainers, and he wasn't running the marathon that year. And this was a problem. I could not hold myself back. So it's 2 weeks or two or 3 weeks before the marathon. I'm doing my last long run. It's 22 miler. And I start going, and I'm holding myself back. But I felt so good. And I'm just like, here we go. And I just went by myself way too hard. And at the end, my buddy came up to me. He's like, congratulations. You just ran the fastest 22 miles you've ever run in your life. And by the way, you just blew your marathon. And I just sort of smirked, and I was like, yeah, but that felt good. And then I had another day where this was the same marathon. And it might have been the next weekend. I was just doing like a 7 miler around the Charles River. And the guys and I had a rule whenever we ran on the Charles River that nobody passes us, no matter what. Even if we're going for a, easy run, somebody comes up behind and passes, it's not happening. So I'm out there by myself, just doing an easy 7, and I hear footsteps behind me. And then this woman comes up next to me, and she clearly is a serious marathoner. She looks it. She's got all the gear. She's got 2 handlers with her, these 2 guys. But she passed me, and I'm like, yeah, can't let it happen. So I catch up, and I go like 2 feet in front of her. So she goes 2 feet in front of me. And next thing you know, we're going at it. Now, turns out we ended up like slowing down and having a laugh about it. But it ended up being Uda Pippig, which unless you're a serious marathoner, you might not know who she was. But
she would have dropped you like a rock.
She would have totally. Yeah, I can't remember if she won that year, but she won the Boston Marathon one other time. But it's like, you got to be careful who you never know who you're playing with, and looks can be deceiving, right?
I had a similar experience on the George Washington Parkway Trail. I was running one morning. It was before daylight, misty, drizzling rain morning, and a friend of mine, Dean, was with me, and we're running. Same thing. We're running along the trail, and we see this Kenyan in front of us, full sweats, little bitty head, tiny body, and I mean they're easy to identify. It's like, there's one of the Kenyan runners, and we're getting close, and Dean's like, don't do this. Like, just don't do this. And I'm like, when we go by, we are fully committed. And Dean's like, you're gonna hurt me. So I get up, we about 5 yards behind, and we get ready, and I'm like, here we go. When we go by, we're going by. And we get up abreast, and I look over, and it's a Kenyan woman, not a man. And I looked at Dean and said, total commitment. And we went. She didn't even respond. Thank goodness. Thank goodness. Yeah. Pride is a terrible thing.
That was nice of her.
And pride's a terrible thing. It'll make grown men do things they shouldn't ought to do. Right?
Totally.
So this the process thing, though, people who enjoy the process, it tends to lead to great results. Like the race is, as you said, a reward of all that work you did that no one saw, that no one knew about it, but you did. And it is emotional for you because you put all that work in for so long. And I loved logging it in my logbook. I loved, meeting a workout, setting a hard workout for myself, and then meeting it, getting to log it and say I did it. I had great confidence from that. I did not race well unless I'd done the work, and I didn't even like to go to a race unless I knew I was going to be fighting to win the race. And you could say, well, that's a character flaw. Well, maybe so. That's just who I am. I would over prepare. Now, I would say near the end, that was a problem for me. I never felt like I was overtrained, but I started having injuries, and I always tried to train through injuries. I pushed through when I should have rested more because I was obsessed with the numbers.
Yeah, I was the same. I mean, I ran through injuries. I did stupid things. Trained too hard, didn't take rest days, but I was also uneducated. Like I didn't really know what I was doing until, I mean, I did as time progressed, and I got involved with these guys who were professional trainers. And then I started to better understand the science of it. But for a long time, I was just go out and run as hard as I could every day. That was it. Like I would do speed work on the treadmill because that made me run a certain pace. There was no option. Otherwise you're shooting off the back. Right. So, and it's a good motivator to not shoot off the back of the treadmill. But I think, again, that's just all part of the inner fire. and it does translate to business. You know, it's interesting because it's the same thing. Like in business, I have to set goals. You know, I'm CEO of this firm, and I have very specific targets and goals. Some are quantitative and financial, others are qualitative. But they're real and they have to be met, and you have to have a plan and a process to achieve those results. And it's the same thing in athletics, particularly the types of sports that we're involved in, right? Team sports are different, not better or worse, just different. You still set goals, championships, whatever it is, but when you're doing an individual thing, you've got to set goals. And you know, I go back to, you know, where I started was my first goal was one telephone pole. I mean, that's literally where I started, which, you know, I've got that in my bank, right? It's not, who cares? Everybody's got a story. I did not go on Oprah. I wouldn't have. But, you know, and like even doing the Ironman, that's in my back pocket. I don't need to talk about it. I'm not a guy walking around with Ironman tattoos, and, but it's in my back pocket. And, you know, when I'm having a bad day at work, I'm like, this is not that bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've been through a lot worse than this. And you know, you haven't even, you know, more extreme rationale than I do, given your background.
Well, it's funny that you put it that way. A friend of mine, Levy Bryant, the first world championship I won in archery. I remember I was in New York. It was at a ski resort up there, and I'd gotten my buckle and came off the podium and went aside, and Levy came up and he just looked at me and said, "That's something no one can ever take away from you. You're a world champion in archery." And I don't think it really struck me at the time, as profound as it was later to me. You're right. I worked really hard for that, and I met my goal, and no one can ever take that away from me. And it doesn't matter what anybody else. It was for me. It was for me.
Yeah, and look, I keep it in perspective too. Like, look, I was not an Olympic athlete. I was a weekend warrior. You know, maybe a little better than that. But even you know, in my professional life, yeah, I'm CEO of a company, and I'm proud of that, and I'm proud of my company. But I'm not Jamie Dimon. I'm not CEO of JP Morgan. So I'm just a regular guy trying to be the best I can be. I mean, that's all you can do.
And that's what this is about. And we shouldn't be comparing. You know,
No,
we're in our 50s, and we're never going to run as fast as we once ran, Dan, period. But the satisfaction of knowing that you set goals wherever you are in life, wherever you are physically, you did the work to reach those goals, and you should justifiably be proud of accomplishing those goals for you. Why you're doing it really matters. That's, you know, we talk about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. And when that motivation's outside of you, when you're doing it for fame, fortune, someone else, doesn't last. When it's internal, when your motivation and your drive, it's for you, that's what gets you through the really tough times.
Yeah, look, that's the thing for me is you know, I'm like you say, I don't judge myself against anybody else. I don't need to. Confident in who I am, and I know. I mean, I know what's in me, and I know from experience that if I set a goal and I follow a process, I'll get there. And I might not be the fastest guy at the starting line, but I'm going to get there. And you know, a lot of people don't have that confidence, or don't have that experience of having done that. So it's like, take the first step, run to that first telephone pole, right? And you'd be surprised, you know, if you stick with it.
That's what I was going to say.
The results.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Hopefully there's a listener out there that tomorrow will say, you know what, I'm going to run to that telephone pole. Hey, it's a start. I have been on the middle of runs when I was really fit, and that was my goal, to keep putting one foot in front of the other till I got to the next telephone pole, and then I'd pick the next one. I can go to that one. I can go to that one. Right. So now let's transition to what diminished the fire, and what took place after.
Well, the fire's not diminished in any way, shape, or form. I'm older and wiser, but the fire is still burning hotter than it probably needs to. So what changed was, I will say this about Ironman. I'm so glad I did it. It was an amazing experience. But it's a selfish endeavor, right? I mean, I was training 40 hours a week. I was single at the time. I had a girlfriend, but I was on a team where we had five guys. They also either had wives or girlfriends. So, it worked. Like, we'd go do our full day of training. We'd do a 120-mile ride and a 15-mile run. And then we'd all get together with our girlfriends and wives and have a nice dinner and, fade to black at 8 o'clock at night and get up and do it again. But it sort of worked. And, but it wasn't sustainable. And I knew that. And I started to, it gets to the identity thing. It became too much of who I was and what I did all day. And to be honest with you, it got to the point where the only time I felt good during the day was when I was training. Otherwise, I was exhausted and just like drained. And I was like, okay, this is too much. This isn't the lifestyle I want. As great as it was, as great as an experience it was. Now, for others who can fit it into their lifestyle with spouses and children, I applaud them. I'm not saying people shouldn't do it, but for me, it was like, okay, I've done that. Now it's time to focus on other things. And that's when I started to focus more on career, because again, it was, my identity was Dan Houlihan, the athlete and the Ironman. I did well at work and was always a high performer, but I wasn't focused on building a company or trying to get to the, climb the ladder. It was more about, all right. I just swam 3 miles this morning at 5 a.m. Now I'm at work. As soon as I leave work, I got to go do a 60-mile bike ride. And everything was just every minute of the day was so structured around training. Right. And training was the priority.
How old were you at this point?
I was probably 32. As you said, I got a late start, if you will. And I got married when I was 40. Well, 39. I turned 40 on my honeymoon. So I just shifted gears and said, okay, I just backed off the triathlon stuff and I stuck with the running because that was my thing. Like, I was a runner. I wasn't built to be a biker. I wasn't the strongest biker. And I had never swam competitively. Although I was I got into a master's swim program and swam a lot of miles. So I stuck with running, and that's when I started my first company, but I was with 2 other co-founders. But I was still single. I had a girlfriend, but wasn't married, no children. And so I made it work. I mean, you can make running work anywhere, right? Even when you're traveling, but the triathlon, you can't, right? You got to swim, you got to bike, and you can't, it's not possible to travel with your bike from a corporate perspective, and your local hotel bike gym bike isn't going to cut it, right? Not at that level. So I just made it work, and I kept running, and I stayed fit, and I raced, and I did that for, I stayed fit for pretty much the entirety of going through starting and selling the 2 companies that we founded. And then getting into 2008, I moved to Chicago, right as the financial crisis was happening, to take a job with Northern Trust, which is where we met, you and I. And I'd say, so I was there for 16 years until 2 years ago. So I would say for the first 5 years, I was still pretty good. I was still committed. I was running every day, or, at least 5 days a week, reasonably fit, not really racing, but staying fit. And then I just, progressed my career there, took on more responsibility, was traveling overseas. And it just became, and I had, at first we had our first child, then we had our second child. And between work and family, I just let it go. Right. I mean, I'd still try here and there, but now all of a sudden I'm on the elliptical trainer, which is no impact, and doing 30 minutes, and, that's fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not, that's not athlete training. That's staying healthy and working out, but I didn't have any goals. I wasn't planning any races, and I just let it go. I was traveling a lot. I was always entertaining, drinking. And I just let myself get really out of shape, stressed out, all the typical type A corporate stuff, right? It was just go. and then, you and I met, and, I knew what I was doing, and I knew that what I was doing was not the path that I should be on. But not, it wasn't like I was doing anything wrong. I just wasn't, it was too much work, not enough family time. Priorities were just out of whack, which it happens. It happens all the day. I talk to a lot of colleagues where it's just this is the art and not the science. Is how do you balance it all? How do you balance being a good husband, being a good father, being a good son? There's just only so many hours in the day. And then when do you squeeze in your workout? So let it go, and then met you. And so we can tell the heart story, but before we even go there, I will say that, my wife still says this. It was a combination of Jimmy Blackman and COVID that saved my life, probably.
Yeah.
But yeah, then I had sort of a wake up call a couple years back, as you were a part of that.
Yeah. I mean, you were not, atypical for the folks that, I was around in the consulting world. You just had a background that was very similar to mine, which made us kindred spirits right off the start. And, I mean, there were so many other folks that just live on the road, eat on the road, drink a lot. I mean, a lot, the
Yeah.
drinking adds up quickly, and it takes more and more, and it's a lot of calories, and you get to where you can't sleep good without the alcohol, and it's just not a good place to be in. So hopefully I get credit for inspiring you to do something. And we're not sponsored by Trek. They're going to get some free. We should be. They're
Yeah,
going to
we
get some
should.
free love here. So I had gotten the new Trek Madone, and I was riding it, and I'd been, of course, cycling for years, and Dan and I got together, and Dan goes, man, I'm getting a bike. I'm gonna get on this thing. I'm gonna get back in the game. So Dan went and bought a new Trek Madone as well. Now he did have to buy a unique bike rack to put on the back of the Porsche, but but he got his Trek Madone and started riding a little bit. And I remember you've got a lake house, and
Yeah.
it's in Wisconsin,
Michigan.
Michigan. So you call me from the lake house, and you're like, there's a loop here. I ride this thing. It's really windy, but I can't get my breath. Like, I'm struggling to get my breath. And I was like, I mean, you aren't young anymore. You haven't ridden in a long time. And I knew your mentality. We knew each other pretty well by this point. And I was like, he's probably trying to ride 25 miles an hour. He's just like, I'm out of shape, but I'm not going to die. So, but you were like, I'm really having trouble catching my breath. So I was coming up. Dan was a client, and I was doing some work in his company, and he said, bring your bike and stay at the house. And so I did. And I brought my bike, went up to Lake Forest, where Dan lives. And so we get ready to go ride, and put our bikes on the bike rack on the Porsche, drive over to this route. We get out, and I said, here, I'll just pull, you get on my wheel. But we were in town. There were a lot of red lights. And so I remember we just went a mile or two, and I could hear you breathing. And we stopped at a red light, and I looked, and you were already soaked with sweat. And we're just cruising along, barely. And I was like, man, he does not look good. And I didn't say anything. We get through that red light. We ride a couple of more, and I could feel you kind of come off my wheel. And I thought, ooh, this is gonna be a long day. He's struggling already. When I look back then, you were white as a piece of paper. Like, I mean, completely white and soaking wet sweat. And then I thought, something's not good. And that's when I asked him, are you all right, man? And you said, I can't catch my breath. Like, I can't breathe. And I immediately thought blockage. I was like, he's not getting oxygen to his muscles, which means that blood's not flowing. Red blood cells ain't getting carried to his muscles. He can't breathe because he can't get oxygen to his muscles. And so anyway, I said, well, let's go back. No, let's push on. And we went just a little bit further, and we stopped again at a red light, and I saw your hamstring was quivering, like, I mean, just shaking like crazy. I said, we're going back. no, you go ahead and ride the ride. I'll go back and I'll just meet you at the car. And you started coughing too. I was like, no, I'm not leaving you. No, we are going back to the car.
But you did leave me.
we got you. We
I
got you
made
safe.
you.
Yeah.
To be
yeah,
fair, I made you.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, you go back, I ride a little bit. I'm like, he's got to have a blockage. It's got to be what it is. So I get back to the car and you were not well. And I'm like, you got to go see your doctor. And you did. And I'll let you pick it up from there. 3 stents later.
No, one stent.
One stent. I thought you had 3.
One stent. So far. So yeah, so I'll go back to the lake story. So I was right. So the loop around our lake house is about 40 miles. And I had done that loop on my bike for years. No problem, rip around. And one of the days that I did it, I actually had to call my wife to come get me. And even she was like, since when don't you finish a ride? And I'm like, I don't know. Something's wrong. And at first we thought, all right, it's just, you're not a kid anymore. And it was like, to your point, I was probably trying to ride 25 miles an hour and those days are gone. Then I tried again the next day and it was just, everything was an effort. And just to take another step back, the reason I started training was COVID had hit, right? So I wasn't traveling. So I had the time. And then I met you because all of my endurance buddies lived back in Boston and we had chatted. And so you picked a race, right? Which was the race in Georgia. Yeah, the 6 gap, right? So that's what we were both training for. So I had that experience with you. And then I knew that day, because I had been riding by myself and only pushing myself so hard. At that point, I was trying to keep up with you, which was pushing myself more than I had. And that's when I realized, okay, something's definitely wrong. So I went through a month of tests. And I don't like, I'm someone who does not enjoy going to the doctor. I generally don't go to the doctor unless I'm bleeding from every orifice, which is probably not healthy. But anyway, so I went to the doctor. Took 4 weeks to do, because I went in for a stress test. I couldn't do a traditional stress test because of the nature of my EKG. So I then had to go do a nuclear stress test. And then I had to do an echocardiogram. And then a few other tests, and they still couldn't really identify what it was. So they said, look, the only way to tell is to do an angiogram, which is, going in this case, through your wrist and your artery to poke around and see what's going on. So they went in and, interestingly, my wife was with me when they talked about doing the angiogram. And my wife said to the cardiologist that, by the way, when you go in there, you may find a Sauvignon Blanc cork that says Kim Crawford on it. And sure enough, so they went in and I was awake for the procedure. And the doctor said, I mean, I can laugh about it now, but the doctor said, well, I found your problem. And I said, okay, what is it? And he said, you've got 80% blockage of the widowmaker. And the widowmaker is the left artery that supplies basically 50% of the blood flow to the heart. And so they didn't stent me right then. They scheduled a stent for the next week, went in, had a stent put in. And so then what happened was they said, okay, you have no restrictions. Like, you're fine. Like, your heart's fine. You have blockage. And so months went by and I said, all right, cool. I came home. I said to my wife, look, I have no restrictions. And she actually sat me down. I've told you the story. She sat me down and she's like, look, jackass, most guys would take this as a wake-up call. You're going to take this as a get out of jail free card.
Yeah. I'm good now.
Wake up. But it was a wake-up call because, one, I'd never had anything wrong with me. I'd broken a lot of bones through football and ski racing, but never had anything any kind of real physical ailment. So it was sort of like, okay, whoa, hold on a second. I'm not invincible. And then I remember you and I were out to dinner and you asked, either you or Bruce, who we were with at the time, asked me, are you scared? And I said, scared is not the right word. I'm obviously concerned, but I was more concerned about my kids. Because I lost my mother when I was 10 years old. And at the time, my daughter, or my youngest, was 10. And I'm like, this is not, no, this isn't the way it goes. And so when I got after had my checkup, they said, all right, for a couple of weeks, take it easy. Got to let the wound on the artery heal, put me on blood thinners, put me on all kinds, beta blocker, high blood pressure medicine. And then I was like, you know what, I'm not doing this either. Like, I'm not spending the rest of my life taking 7 pills a day just to keep myself alive, so to speak. And lots of people have stents. So this wasn't life threatening. I mean, well, what they did say was, look, this wasn't if, it was when. And, we couldn't tell you if it was 2 days from now or 20 years from now, but you either would have had a massive heart attack or a stroke. And so when we say the combination of COVID and Jimmy Blackman saved my life, it's sort of true that if COVID hadn't hit, I wouldn't have had the time to start training. And had I not met you, I certainly wouldn't have been doing any sort of endurance training. I'd have just been, doing whatever, going for a 3-mile jog. So fortunately we found it. And then, so what I did there was for 10 months, as you know, I left my job. I didn't leave. I was part of the Great Resignation. I didn't leave because of my heart. I left for other reasons, but they said, look, you have no restrictions. You can do whatever you want. And so I immediately, I just stopped drinking, was eating really well, and got back on the bike and was training, lost 30 pounds, blood pressure went way down. Finally got, I said, look, I want to get off these meds, get off the blood thinner, reduced my blood pressure medication in half. And then I said to the doctor, look, you said I have no restrictions, but I want to be very specific. When I say no restrictions, like, I'd like to potentially do an Ironman. He's like, oh, okay. Because, not everybody's restrictions are contextual, right? So he said, all right, well, theoretically, there's no reason you can't, but I'd like you to do a stress test with a Doppler radar. And so I said, okay, fine, good. And so I went in, I told you the story. So I went in, and it's a typical stress test where they put you on a treadmill and they get you, the mask on, and they just keep slowly increasing the speed and the angle of the treadmill until you basically go to failure and you can't go anymore. And then with the Doppler piece, what they do is, as soon as you fail, they literally roll you onto a bed, and then the other technician does the ultrasound to see how your heart is doing during the recovery process. So I said to the technician, okay, here's how this is going to go. I'm literally going to try to give myself a heart attack right now. And he's like, what do you mean? And I said, well, the whole reason I'm taking this test is I'd like to be able to get back into endurance athletics. And this is just a sort of safety check. And so I'm going to literally try to give myself a heart attack, because I'd rather have one here with you with the paddles than have one 50 miles from my house on my bike when I'm alone. And he sort of thought I was joking, but I wasn't. So did that test, it hurt, but came back clean. Like, yeah, fine. Your heart is perfectly good. So, so again, got it cleaned up. And now I'm back at work, and I'm CEO of a company that is not in Chicago. So I travel every week. I generally fly out Sunday evenings to Westchester, Pennsylvania, and fly back Thursday evening. And so, it's a challenge. I'm fit, but I'm not as fit as I'd like to be. And, you and I are talking about goals and some potential big races. It's easier when I'm here. When I'm here, I'm very focused. And in fact, I just did, hour and a half on the bike a couple hours ago, did an hour and a half yesterday. So I'm on it. But there's no bike where I am yet. There will be when I move into an apartment. And so I work out in the hotel gym when I'm there. So I feel like I'm not as fit as I'd like to be. But I'm trying to balance it all, right? Trying to balance work, trying to balance family. I make it a priority as you have to, right? And that's the key.
That's the key to
you got to make it part. You got to make it part of your day.
You have to change your lifestyle, and that, for all the business folks out there that travel and live the life that you and I live, as I've, really taken control of things, it's that there is no staying up late and at the bar. There's no drinking. I mean, if you can look, for me, there's not, if you can have a drink or whatever and go back to your room and you're fine, okay. But you're not going to get up at 4:30 and do that workout, and on the road, that has to be what it is. I can't on a hotel bike, even if it's a Peloton, an hour's my limit, usually 45 minutes, but then I can get on the treadmill and run another half hour, 45 minutes. And that, that burns enough. I can lift a little bit. You're always compromising. It's not perfect. You're not on your bike. You're not at home, but you're burning, you're
Yeah,
sustaining
something's
your
better than
fitness.
nothing.
Yeah. And then I got to eat to be able to, refuel my body, get the protein in. So the fast food, it just can't be. You have to make
Yeah.
hard choices where, no, I got to get a good meal, and it's got to be quality nutrition, because I am going to get up early and work out, and I've got to make myself go to bed. So when I'm on the road, it keeps me from doing anything stupid, because I'm either working or I'm working out or I'm refueling, and that's about it.
Yeah.
That
Yeah, no, it's, I mean, if I don't work out in the morning, it's on my mind all day. It's like, okay, how am I going to get this in?
Yeah.
And make it a priority. Just do it.
Yeah. I mean, it's April 8th. I've missed one day all year, and I just,
I can't say that. I can't say that I'm that
I
good.
I just can't. For me, it just can't. When I miss one, I'll miss two. When I miss two, I'll miss three. And I know myself, so I have to stay on it. But there are folks out there that certainly relate to the story you just shared. What do you think the best advice you could give, having gone through this a couple of times, to any of them would be? I don't
I
like the
mean,
way I look or the way I feel.
yeah, you just got to take the first step. And again, it sounds cliche, but run to that first telephone pole, but stick with it, because the process works. You will get stronger. You will, you got to put the time in. It took me years to be able to do the Ironman. So it was a constant pursuit of progression, not perfection. Um, but make it a priority, and don't, set some goals, but set realistic goals. You don't have to, start out by running a marathon. Pick a 5K, pick a Thanksgiving turkey trot. And even if you jog, you run half of it and walk the second half, it's a start. Like, and don't compare yourself to other people. And I think, I personally don't, like, I never had a personal trainer. It's not my thing, but other people like it. I just don't want someone screaming at me. I'm self-motivated. I'd probably tell them to stick it. But join a gym, join a running club. Most running clubs have everything, people from novice level to elite level. So there's always a place, and the camaraderie of it is half the fun. Right. Meeting new people. Like, I love, like, when you did Leadville this year, and I was obviously your support crew. I just love, I didn't race, and I was envious of you but I wasn't ready. I had no business even trying, but I just loved, and I meant, like, it was so nice to be back in that atmosphere, right?
Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
everybody's nice to each other. It's just a healthy, fun environment, watching people push themselves. And I missed like that. I do miss that.
Yeah.
That would get me to a local 5K, just to have that. It's a great experience on a Saturday morning. A couple hours, you go run a race, get some free food at the end, lots of nice people. It's a great way to start your day, right? On
Absolutely.
a Saturday.
Yeah. And
Find fun.
it's very,
Finding fun in it, I think, is the key, right? Because it's pain and suffering, but
yeah.
it's no pain, no gain.
Yeah,
So,
and it's well worth it on the backside, that satisfaction of looking at yourself and having pride in what you've accomplished. And, look at me and look what I just did, and thinking back to where you were, a year ago. And I get this is, as I've shared my journey, on social media. It's very gratifying to me to get these. I get at least one or two messages a day, sometimes 5 or 6, from people either on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and they say, "Hey, man, I know you don't know me, but I've been watching your stuff, and I just want you to know." I had a guy tell me the other day, "I haven't drank in 6 months, and I've lost 30 pounds, and I'm running again, and I feel great. Thanks for just helping me do something about it." And I really enjoy that, and I hope that's what we can do with this. This ain't about me. This is about helping people be the best version of themselves that they can be, because I know how much better I feel being fit, being, getting that workout, being around people, like you said, that it's infectious, that feeling. And it's so positive.
Yeah.
And we're surrounded by angry people all day long that are divided, and they just pissed off perpetually, right? And so to go hang out with some folks that go, yeah, man, I did 80 miles last week, and it was raining and it sucked, but you know what? I'm glad I did it. It's over now, and I look back and I'm glad I did. That's, it's a great community, to be sure. And like you said, it definitely correlates to business. This ability to focus, set goals, measure. As a consultant, that's one of the biggest things that I see that's a problem in most businesses, large and small, is accountability and measuring. And, people just don't do it very well. And if you're willing to hold yourself accountable, it's a lot easier to hold your business accountable, or to hold people accountable of, no, we set a goal. We said we were going to do this. Now let's just grade our homework.
Yeah, that self-accountability, I think it gets back to the internal fire and how hot it burns. But, and you're the same way. I'm brutal on myself. Probably too hard.
Yeah.
Like my inner voice in the conversations I have. What I would say is my inner voice is busy, and loud, and I would characterize it as I have an unquiet mind, for better or worse. But it's, it's a blessing and a curse, as we say, but I take it seriously. I hold myself accountable, whether I'm working out. Like, all right, if I set a goal that I'm going to ride for an hour, I'm not riding for 45 minutes. I'm riding for an hour. And if I rode for 45 minutes, I'd be disgusted with myself. Right. And I'm sure you're the same. And it really doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. I still got a 45-minute workout in, but no, I said an hour. So I'm doing an hour. And same thing with work. I have to hit these goals. Now I have to do this through other people, which is inspiration and motivation, all the other things that you and I talk about often. But it's the same principle. And, I hold myself highly accountable at work. And I'm very, as you know, I'm very intense and passionate about it. And I like to have a good time as like everybody else. But, it's when you're at work, it's like, all right, it's time to rock and roll. Like if you're going to work 10, 12, 15 hours in a day, you might as well rock it, right? What's the point?
Yeah. That's it.
Otherwise, why turn up?
Yeah. I think it's, I don't know if it's Goggins or one of them guys says all the time, if I know I'm going to suffer, so if I'm going to suffer, I'm going to get some reward for my suffering, right? I'm going to make it count. I want to get something out of it.
Yeah, but the important thing is, look, I'm just a regular dude, right? A regular guy that I'm driven. Yeah, sure. But I'm not trying to be an Olympian. I'm not trying to set any world records. I'm just trying to be as good as I can be and be better than yesterday. And, that's okay. Like, I love that. I don't like you and I both know you're a stronger biker than I am. I'm not trying to be as fast as Jimmy Blackman. I love riding with you and hanging out with you. But, and I'll tell everybody, we were out in Colorado riding and we did this big climb, right? You're on your mountain bike. I'm on my Trek road bike and you smoked me, but I didn't care. I was just jazzed to do the climb.
Yeah. Great times. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap it up. Just trying to be the best me that I can be,
Yeah, that's it.
Dan, thanks for the time today. I appreciate you coming on.
Always.
The old dark roads and a hero passes by, another one's gone to the other side.